The cry shattered the midnight silence of Ashford House like glass breaking against stone. Lucian Ashford, Duke of Greystone, stood frozen in the doorway of his private study, his hand gripping the crystal tumbler so tightly the cut glass bit into his palm. 3 floors above, his infant son wailed with the particular desperation of a child who had been crying far too long, and every instinct Lucian possessed screamed at him to move, to go to the nursery, to comfort the boy who bore his name and his blood. But he could not. He had made a vow. 6 weeks ago, in this very room, he had stood before his wife and sworn with cold precision that he would never touch her again, that their marriage, contracted for duty and sealed in grief, would remain exactly what it had always been intended to be, a transaction. She would be provided for, protected, given every material comfort his vast fortune could supply. But there would be no affection, no tenderness, no false hope of something more. He had watched her gray eyes fill with tears she refused to shed, watched her spine straighten as though his words were blows she must steel herself against, and he had felt nothing, or told himself he felt nothing, because the feeling was dangerous. Feeling was a weakness. Feeling was what had destroyed him once before, and he could not allow it to happen again. The crying stopped. Lucian's breath caught in his throat. In the sudden silence, he heard something else. A voice, soft and clear, drifting down from the nursery like something sacred. His wife was singing. He could not make out the words at first, only the melody. Something old, something French, something that wrapped around his chest and squeezed until he thought his ribs might crack. His feet moved without permission, carrying him from the study to the grand staircase, up the first flight of stairs, then the second, each step bringing him closer to that voice, closer to the sound that was unraveling every carefully constructed wall he had built around his heart. By the time he reached the nursery door, left slightly ajar, the song had become clear. A lullaby, simple, achingly tender, and his son, his heir, the infant Duke Lucian had barely allowed himself to look at since the day of his birth, had gone quiet in her arms. Lucian stood in the doorway, hidden by shadow, and watched. His wife, Delphine, though he had not spoken her name aloud in weeks, sat in the rocking chair by the window, moonlight turning her honey-colored hair to silver. She held his son against her chest, one hand supporting the baby's head with impossible gentleness, the other stroking his tiny back in slow, soothing circles. She wore only her nightgown, modest white cotton that revealed nothing, and somehow made her look more beautiful than any ball gown ever had. Her feet were bare against the wooden floor. Her face, turned down toward the child, held an expression of such pure, unguarded love that Lucian felt something inside him crack. She had no obligation to be here. The wet nurse slept in the adjoining room. The nursemaid had been dismissed hours ago. Delphine should have remained in her own chambers, deaf to the cries of a child who was not hers by blood, who had been born of another woman's body, who represented everything painful about the marriage she had entered with such quiet, devastating dignity. But she had come, and she was singing. Dors, mon petit, dors tranquille, she sang, her voice breaking slightly on the French words. Sleep, my little one, sleep peacefully. The night is gentle and I am here. You are safe. You are loved. You are not alone. The last words were whispered rather than sung, and Lucian saw her press a kiss to his son's downy head, saw a tear slip down her cheek and fall onto the baby's white gown. His hand reached for the door frame to steady himself. The wood creaked. Delphine's head came up sharply. Her gray eyes met him across the darkened nursery, and in them he saw everything he had tried to deny. Hope and pain and longing and resignation all tangled together in a look that stripped him bare. I did not mean to wake you, Your Grace, she said quietly, her voice careful, formal, the voice of a woman who had learned not to expect kindness. He was crying. The nurse was exhausted. I thought. Do not stop, Lucian heard himself say, the words rough, almost desperate. The song. Do not stop. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or fear, or something more dangerous. But she nodded, turned her attention back to the now sleeping infant in her arms, and began again. Dors, mon petit, dors tranquille. And Lucian Ashford, Duke of Greystone, the man who had vowed never to feel again, who had locked his heart away where it could not be wounded, who had promised himself he would never, ever allow another woman close enough to destroy him. He stepped into the nursery. He crossed to where his wife sat rocking his son. And when she looked up at him with those luminous gray eyes, filled with confusion and wariness and a hope she was trying desperately to hide, he did the one thing he had sworn he would never do again. He reached out and touched her face. To understand how Lucian Ashford came to stand in that moonlit nursery, breaking every vow he had made to himself, one must first understand the woman who had unmade him with nothing more than a lullaby. Delphine Laurent had never expected to become a duchess. She had been raised in modest comfort in a small village in Kent, the daughter of a French émigré scholar and his English wife. Her father had fled France during the Revolution with nothing but his books and his conscience, and had built a quiet life teaching languages to the children of country gentry. Delphine had grown up surrounded by poetry and music, by the scent of her mother's herb garden and the sound of her father's voice reading aloud by firelight. She had been content, more than content. She had been happy in that small, sunlit world where love was measured not in jewels or titles, but in Sunday walks through meadows thick with wildflowers, in her father's hand resting gentle on her mother's shoulder, in the way they looked at each other across the dinner table as though sharing a secret the rest of the world would never understand. When fever took her parents within days of each other during the harsh winter of 1813, Delphine was 20 years old and utterly alone. The cottage was not hers. It belonged to Lord Hartley, on whose estate her father had taught. The modest savings her parents had accumulated barely lasted 6 months. She had no family in England, no connections, no fortune to recommend her. She had only her education, her quiet dignity, and a heart that had been so thoroughly shattered by grief that she wondered if she would ever feel whole again. It was Lord Hartley's wife, taking pity on the orphaned girl, who had arranged the position. A distant cousin, recently widowed under tragic circumstances, required a governess for his young daughter. The pay would be generous. The position is respectable. And if Delphine proved satisfactory, Lady Hartley hinted with careful delicacy, perhaps the widower might consider a more permanent arrangement. Delphine had understood immediately what was being suggested. She was being offered not just employment, but the possibility of marriage. Marriage to a man wealthy enough, desperate enough, to overlook her lack of dowry in exchange for someone educated and gentle to manage his household and mother his child. She had very little pride left to wound. She accepted. She arrived at Ashford House on a gray March morning in 1814, her few belongings packed in a single worn trunk, her heart armored against disappointment by months of grief and hardship. She expected a middle-aged widower, perhaps unkind, certainly indifferent, a child who would resent her, a household that would view her with contempt. What she found was something far more dangerous. Lucian Ashford was 28 years old, in the prime of his life and power, and when he descended the grand staircase to greet her in the entrance hall of Ashford House, Delphine forgot how to breathe. He was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with softness and everything to do with severity. Dark hair that fell across his forehead, eyes the color of winter storms, a face carved by grief into something harder and more remote than marble. He moved with the unconscious grace of a man accustomed to being obeyed, his broad shoulders held with rigid control, his expression revealing nothing. "Miss Laurent," he said, his voice low and clipped, each syllable precise. "Thank you for coming. My daughter is upstairs. Mrs. Marsh will show you to your quarters." That was all. No warmth. No welcome. He turned and walked away before she could even curtsy, dismissing her as though she were a piece of furniture that had been delivered and required no further attention. But in that brief moment before he turned, Delphine had seen something flicker in his eyes, something that looked almost like recognition, as though he had seen in her face the same desolation that lived in his own. Little Lady Catherine Ashford was 6 years old, with her father's dark hair and her mother's delicate features, and she did not speak. Not a word. Not even to her devoted nurse, Mrs. Marsh, who explained with tears in her eyes that the child had not uttered a sound since the day her mother died 9 months before. "She saw it happen, poor lamb," Mrs. Marsh whispered, her weathered hands twisting in her apron. The Duchess, the late Duchess, God rest her soul. She fell down the main staircase. Her neck broke instantly. Little Lady Catherine was standing right there at the top of the stairs. She hasn't spoken since. Grace blames himself, though Lord knows it wasn't his fault. But he can barely look at the child without. She broke off, shook her head. Perhaps you'll have better luck with her, miss. Perhaps a gentle touch is what she needs. Over the following weeks, Delphine learned the terrible story piece by piece, gathered from hushed conversations between servants and careful omissions in what was actually said. The late Duchess, Isabella Ashford, had been breathtakingly beautiful, charming, the daughter of an earl, everything a duchess should be. Her marriage to Lucian had been celebrated as a love match, rare among their class, envied by all who witnessed it. He had adored her. She had been his entire world. But after Catherine's birth, something had changed. Isabella grew restless, reckless. She took lovers, flaunted her affairs, spent money with wild abandon, disappeared for weeks at a time to house parties where her behavior scandalized even the most dissolute members of the town. And Lucian, proud and private, had borne it all in silence, unwilling to publicly acknowledge that the woman he loved had made him a fool. The night she died, they had quarreled. Violently, the entire household had heard the Duchess screaming, heard the Duke's cold, measured responses that somehow cut deeper than any shout. She had fled toward the stairs, unsteady with wine and rage, and she had fallen. An accident, surely an accident. But London whispered that perhaps the Duke had pushed her, that perhaps he had finally snapped under the weight of years of humiliation and betrayal. Nothing was ever proven. Nothing was ever said directly to Lucian's face. But the whispers followed him like ghosts, and in response, he had withdrawn behind walls of ice that nothing could penetrate. He barely spoke to his daughter, could not bear to look at her without seeing Isabella, without remembering. He buried himself in the management of his estates, in Parliament, in anything that kept him far from the nursery where a silent 6-year-old grieved for a mother who had never truly loved her. Delphine's heart broke for them both. The cold, remote man who would not let himself feel, and the small, silent child who felt too much. She devoted herself to Catherine with fierce, quiet determination. She did not try to force the girl to speak. Instead, she sat beside her in the sunlit schoolroom and read aloud. Poetry, fairy tales, stories of brave children who survived terrible things and found their way home. She taught Catherine to paint with watercolors, to press flowers in heavy books, to play simple songs on the piano. And slowly, so slowly Delphine almost missed it, Catherine began to heal. The child did not speak, not yet, but she smiled. She laughed silently when Delphine tickled her or made silly faces or pretended to be a very serious duchess taking tea with imaginary guests. She reached for Delphine's hand when they walked in the gardens. She curled into Delphine's lap when thunder crashed outside and the memories became too much. Lucian noticed. He said nothing, still maintained that terrible, cold distance. But Delphine would catch him watching from doorways, his expression unreadable, his hands clenched at his sides as though restraining himself from something. And once, when she was singing Catherine to sleep, she looked up to find him standing in the corridor. His face turned away but his shoulders rigid with some emotion he would not name. He left before she could speak. He always left. 6 months after Delphine's arrival, Lord Hartley visited Ashford House to see how his project was progressing. He found the Duke in his study and spoke with the blunt practicality of an old friend who knew when delicacy was pointless. "The girl has worked a miracle with Catherine," Hartley said, accepting a glass of brandy. "The child is transformed. You should marry her, Lucian, Miss Laurent. Make it permanent. Catherine needs a mother, and you. I need nothing." Lucian cut him off, his voice sharp as a blade. "You need an heir," Hartley countered quietly. "Catherine cannot inherit. Your cousin Edmund is next in line, and the man is an embarrassment. Marry the governess. She's gentle, educated, pretty enough. Get yourself a son and secure the succession. It needn't be anything more than that." Lucian stared into his brandy glass for a long moment. I will not marry for love, he said finally, each word carved from ice. I will not make that mistake again. Then marry for duty, Hartley replied. Ask the girl. She has nowhere else to go, Lucian. You would be doing her a kindness. That evening, Lucian summoned Delphine to his study. She came with her heart in her throat, certain she was being dismissed, that somehow she had failed, that Catherine would be lost to her forever. Instead, the Duke of Greystone offered her a chair, poured her a glass of sherry she did not want, and proposed marriage with all the warmth of a man negotiating a business contract. I require an heir, he said without preamble. You have proven yourself capable with Catherine. I am prepared to offer you the position of Duchess of Greystone. You will have your own apartments, your own staff, an extremely generous allowance. I will make no demands upon your time beyond what is required for social obligations and the production of a son. Delphine's hands trembled around the sherry glass. And what of affection, your grace? She asked quietly, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it spoken. There will be none, he said flatly. I do not have it to give. What I offer is security, position, and the opportunity to continue as Catherine's mother in every way that matters. If you find those terms acceptable, we will be married by special license within the month. If not, I will provide you with an excellent reference and 6 months' wages to establish yourself elsewhere. It was the coldest proposal any woman had ever received. Delphine looked at this beautiful, broken man who held himself together through sheer force of will, who could not bear to touch his own daughter, who had loved once and been destroyed by it. She thought of Catherine, who had just begun to smile again. She thought of the empty cottage in Kent, her parents' graves under the old oak tree, the loneliness that had been her only companion for so long. She thought of the way Lucian had stood in the corridor listening to her sing, the way his hands had clenched as though fighting something he desperately wanted and desperately feared. I accept, she said. His eyes closed briefly, and something flickered across his face that might have been relief or might have been regret. Very well, he said. We will wed on the 1st of June. They were married in the chapel at Ashford House before a handful of witnesses. Delphine wore a simple gown of ivory silk. Lucian wore black, as though attending a funeral. He did not look at her during the ceremony. His voice when he spoke his vows was steady, empty of all emotion. When the vicar said he might kiss his bride, Lucian's jaw tightened visibly. He leaned forward, pressed his lips to her forehead for exactly 1 second, and stepped back as though she had burned him. Your Grace, he said, using her new title like a wall between them. Your Grace, she replied, accepting the distance he required. The wedding breakfast was brief, formal. That night, he came to her chambers to consummate the marriage as duty required. He was gentle, careful, utterly silent. His hands did not linger. His eyes did not meet hers. When it was finished, he rose, dressed, and left without a word. It was the only time he touched her with any intimacy. 6 weeks later, the physician confirmed what Delphine had already begun to suspect. She was with child. She told Lucian in his study, standing before his desk like a servant reporting completion of an assigned task. I am with your child, Your Grace. The physician estimates I am nearly 2 months along. Lucian's hands stilled on the papers before him. For 1 heartbeat, 2, his face revealed something. Hope, perhaps, or fear, or some complicated mixture of both. Then the shutters came down. Excellent, he said, his voice devoid of warmth. You have fulfilled your primary obligation. I trust you will take every care with your health. Inform me when your confinement begins. Of course, Your Grace. She turned to leave. Delphine. Her name on his lips stopped her like a physical touch. She turned back, her heart in her throat. He stood now, his hands braced on the desk, his face turned away from her. I want you to understand, he said quietly, each word carefully controlled, that this changes nothing between us. You will have my protection, my support, every material comfort. But I cannot. His voice caught, and he forced it back to steadiness. I will not repeat the mistakes of my first marriage. I will not allow myself to feel anything for you beyond respect. Do not expect more. Do not hope for more. It will only cause you pain. The words landed like blows. Delphine stood very still, her hands clasped before her to hide their trembling. I understand, Your Grace, she said, proud that her voice did not waver. I will endeavor not to be a burden to you. She left before the tears could fall, and Lucien remained alone in his study, his hands gripping the desk so tightly the wood creaked, telling himself that cruelty now was kindness in the long run, that distance would protect them both, that he was doing the right thing even as everything inside him screamed that he was a fool. Over the following months, Delphine's belly swelled with his child, and Lucien kept his vow. He did not touch her, barely spoke to her beyond what politeness required. When they attended social functions together, he was courteous, remote, everything a proper husband should be and nothing more. He did not visit her chambers, did not ask how she fared, did not place his hand on her belly to feel his son kick, though sometimes she saw him staring at her across the dining table with an expression that looked almost like longing before he caught himself and looked away. She bore it with quiet dignity, because what else could she do? She focused on Catherine, who had begun to speak again. Single words at first, then short sentences, then whole paragraphs tumbling out as though a dam had broken. The girl called her Mama, and Delphine wept with joy and heartbreak tangled so tightly together she could not separate them. She read to the child growing inside her, sang him French lullabies, pressed her hands to her belly and promised him that even if his father could not love her, she would love him enough for both of them. And when her time came, in the cold early morning of a February day, when the pain tore through her like knives and the midwife's face grew tight with worry, when she screamed for her mother who was dead and for her husband who would not come, it was Catherine's small hand she held, Catherine's voice, newly found and precious, whispering, "Please do not leave me, Mama. Please, you promised." The baby was born as dawn broke over the frozen grounds of Ashford House. A son, healthy, strong, with lungs that announced his arrival to the entire household. The physician came to Lucien's study hours later to inform him that he had an heir. "And my wife?" Lucien asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Alive, Your Grace, though it was difficult. She will recover, but she should not attempt another child for at least 2 years, if at all." Relief and terror warred in Lucien's chest. He nodded once, dismissed the man, and did not go to see her. He told himself it was because she needed rest, because his presence would only disturb her, because duty had been fulfilled and there was no reason to pretend otherwise. The truth, which he would not acknowledge, was that he was afraid. Afraid of what he might feel if he saw her holding his son. Afraid that the walls he had built so carefully might crumble if he allowed himself to be in the same room with the woman who haunted his dreams and the child who carried his name. So he stayed away, and when the infant cried in the deep of night, when the wet nurse could not soothe him, when the entire nursery staff was at their wits' end, Delphine rose from her bed despite the physician's orders to rest. She went to the child who was not fully hers by right of birth but was hers by every measure that mattered. And she sang. The morning after Lucien found his wife singing to his son, he woke with his hand still tingling from the touch of her cheek. He had pulled away almost immediately, had seen the confusion and hope flood her eyes, had turned and left the nursery without another word because words would have been dangerous. Words might have revealed too much. Now, in the cold light of dawn, sitting in his study with a cup of coffee, he could not bring himself to drink. Lucien tried to convince himself that last night had been an aberration, a moment of weakness, nothing more. He had touched her face for less than 3 seconds, had felt the warmth of her skin, the dampness of tears she had shed for his child, and something inside him had cracked so loudly he was certain she must have heard it. He would not allow it to happen again. At breakfast he was coldly polite, inquired after her health with the distant courtesy of a stranger, did not meet her eyes, left the table before she had finished her tea. Delphine watched him go, her hands wrapped around her cup for warmth, and tried not to feel the sharp stab of disappointment. For one moment last night she had thought, but no, she had learned not to hope. Hope was the cruelest punishment. The distance between them stretched taut as a violin string. And then, 3 days later, something shifted. It began with Catherine. The girl burst into the morning room where Delphine sat writing letters, her face alight with excitement. "Mama! Mama, you must come. I have something to show you." The words tumbled out in a rush, and even after months of hearing Catherine speak, Delphine's heart still swelled with joy at the sound. "Of course, darling. What is it?" "It is a surprise, but you must come now before it disappears." Catherine grabbed Delphine's hand and pulled her from her chair, through the corridors of Ashford House, out into the gardens where early spring had finally begun to soften winter's grip. At the far end of the rose garden, near the old stone wall covered in ivy, Catherine pointed triumphantly at something on the ground. "Look, snowdrops, the first ones. Papa always said Mama." She stopped abruptly, the joy draining from her face as she realized what she had said. "I mean my first Mama, not you. I did not mean." "Hush, sweetheart." Delphine knelt beside her, gathering the child into her arms. "I know who you meant, and it is all right to remember her. She gave you life. She will always be your mother too." Catherine's thin arms wrapped around Delphine's neck. "But you are my Mama now," she whispered fiercely. "You are the one who stayed." Delphine's eyes burned with tears as she blinked away. She pressed a kiss to Catherine's dark hair and said quietly, "And I will always stay, my darling. Always. That is a promise you should not make lightly." The voice came from behind them, low and cold. Delphine's head came up sharply. Lucian stood at the edge of the garden path, his hands behind his back, his face expressionless. How long had he been standing there? How much had he heard? "Your Grace." She rose smoothly, keeping one hand on Catherine's shoulder. "We were admiring the snowdrops." "So I see." His eyes moved to his daughter, and something flickered in their storm-gray depths before he shuddered it away. "Catherine, Mrs. Marsh is looking for you. Your drawing master has arrived." "But Papa." "Now, Catherine." The girl's face fell, but she obeyed. She curtsied to them both and ran back toward the house, casting one confused glance over her shoulder before disappearing through the garden door. Silence fell between husband and wife like a curtain. Delphine straightened her spine, preparing for coldness, for dismissal. Instead, Lucian moved closer, near enough that she caught the scent of sandalwood and leather that clung to him, near enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You should not promise her forever," he said quietly. "You do not know what the future holds." "I know that I love her," Delphine replied with equal quiet. "And that is enough." "Love." The word was bitter on his tongue. "Love is never enough. Love is what destroys us." She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw beneath the cold mask to the man underneath. The man who was so terribly afraid of being hurt again that he would rather feel nothing at all. "I am sorry," she said softly, "for whatever she did to you, your first wife. I am sorry she made you believe that love is only pain." His jaw tightened. "You know nothing about it. I know that you loved her, and that she wounded you, and that you have decided never to risk your heart again." Delphine took a small step closer, her gray eyes holding his. "But Lucian, shutting yourself away from feeling anything is not strength. It is merely a slower kind of death." She had never used his Christian name before, not once in all the months of their marriage. The sound of it on her lips made him flinch as though she had struck him. "Do not presume to know what I feel," he said, his voice dangerously low. "And do not presume to call me by my name. We are not intimates, madam. We never will be." The words were designed to hurt, and they succeeded. Delphine paled, but her chin came up. "Forgive me, your grace. I forgot my place." She curtsied with perfect formality. "If you will excuse me, I should see the baby." She moved to step past him. His hand shot out, catching her wrist. They both froze. Delphine's pulse hammered beneath his fingers. Lucian stared at his own hand as though it belonged to someone else, horrified by the touch he had sworn never to initiate, unable to make himself let go. "I did not mean," he stopped, his throat working. "That is, I should not have." "It is quite all right, your grace." Her voice was carefully controlled, revealing nothing. You need not apologize for speaking plainly. I prefer honesty to false kindness. She gently pulled her wrist free, and this time he let her go. She walked back toward the house without looking back, her spine straight, her head high, every inch the Duchess she had become. Lucian stood alone among the snowdrops and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Shame. That evening, he did something he had not done since their wedding night. He went to her. Not to her chambers, that would have been too intimate, too dangerous. But to the music room where she spent her evenings, teaching Catherine to play simple melodies on the pianoforte. The door was open. He stood in the doorway and watched as Delphine guided his daughter's small fingers across the keys. Her voice soft with encouragement as Catherine stumbled through a folk tune. There, you see? You are doing beautifully. Try it again, just the first phrase. Catherine giggled and tried again, hitting more right notes than wrong ones this time. Delphine clapped her hands with delight. Perfect. Oh, Catherine, you were so clever. The girl beamed, pride radiating from every inch of her small frame. Do you really think so, Mama? I know so, my darling. Now, once more from the beginning, and then it is time for bed. Lucian's throat tightened. He had not heard that kind of joy in his daughter's voice since before Isabella died. Had not seen her smile without shadows in her eyes. And it was Delphine who had given that back to her. Delphine, whom he had hurt this morning with careless cruelty. Delphine, who deserved far better than the cold shell of a man he had become. As though sensing his presence, she looked up. Their eyes met across the candlelit room. He saw her shoulders tense, saw her prepare for more coldness, more distance. Instead, he said quietly, "That was lovely. Both of you." Catherine's head whipped around. "Papa, did you hear me play? Did you truly think it was lovely?" "I did, Poppet." The endearment slipped out before he could stop it. He had not called her that since she was tiny, since before Isabella's death had made him afraid to love anything too much. Catherine's eyes went wide, shining with sudden tears. "Papa," she whispered, and before he could prepare himself, she launched from the piano bench and threw herself at him, her thin arms wrapping around his waist. Lucian froze, every muscle in his body locked tight. Touch was dangerous. Touch led to attachment. Attachment led to pain. But his daughter was pressed against him, her face buried in his waistcoat, and his arms moved without permission. They came up slowly, awkwardly, and folded around her small frame. She felt so fragile, like something that might break if he held too tight or not tight enough. "Papa, I have missed you," Catherine said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I know you were sad about Mama, about my first Mama, but I have missed you so very much." Something inside Lucian shattered. His arms tightened. One hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her dark curls. "I have missed you too, Poppet," he said hoarsely. "More than you know." Catherine pulled back just far enough to look up at him, her eyes, Isabella's eyes, searching his face. "Will you come hear me play sometimes? Mama says I am getting better. I want to play for you." He swallowed hard. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I will come." Her smile was radiant. She kissed his cheek, whispered, "I love you, Papa," and then ran back to the piano bench, chattering to Delphine about how Papa had said she played beautifully, and did that not mean she should stay up an extra hour? Delphine smiled at the girl, but her eyes were on Lucian, soft with something that looked almost like pride. "I think," she said gently, "that even beautifully playing children must still go to bed at a reasonable hour. Come, darling, let us get you upstairs." She ushered Catherine from the room with practiced ease, leaving Lucian standing alone in the doorway. But as she passed him, she paused, looked up at him, and said very quietly, "Thank you." Then she was gone, following Catherine's chatter down the corridor toward the nursery. Lucian remained motionless, his arms still tingling from the feel of his daughter's embrace. His mind replaying the moment over and over. He had touched her. He had allowed himself to feel. And the world had not ended. Perhaps it had only just begun. Over the following days, Something shifted in the careful architecture of their household. Lucian began appearing at breakfast. Not lingering, not making conversation, but present. His eyes would rest on Delphine across the table, watching as she cut fruit into small pieces for the baby, who sat in a cushioned chair beside her, cooing and waving his chubby fists. "He is strong," Lucian observed one morning, the words abrupt. Delphine looked up, surprised. "Yes, the physician says he is thriving." "What do you call him?" The question hung in the air. The baby had been christened James Lucian Ashford, heir to the Duke of Greystone. But Delphine had not known if she was permitted to use more intimate names. "I call him Jamie," she admitted softly, "when we are alone. Do you object?" "No." Lucian's eyes moved to his son, taking in the downy dark hair, the fat cheeks, the bright eyes that tracked movement with avid curiosity. "Jamie is fitting." It was the longest conversation they had shared since their wedding. That afternoon, Lucian went riding on his estate as was his custom. But when he returned, instead of going directly to his study, he stopped by the nursery. The door was open. Inside, Delphine sat on the floor, her fine muslin gown spread around her like a cloud, with Jamie propped against cushions before her. She was singing softly, clapping her hands in rhythm, and the baby was laughing, a sound like bells, pure and joyful. Lucian's chest tightened. Delphine looked up and saw him there. For a moment, neither moved. Then she said quietly, "Would you like to hold him?" It was the first time she had ever offered. Lucian's first instinct was to refuse, to maintain distance, to protect himself. But he thought of Catherine's arms around his waist, of the crack in his carefully constructed armor, of the way his wife looked at him with those luminous gray eyes as though she could see straight through to the terrified man beneath. "Yes," he said. He crossed to where she sat and lowered himself awkwardly to the floor beside her. The position was undignified, absurd even, a duke sitting on a nursery floor like a peasant. But Delphine did not laugh. She simply lifted Jamie carefully and placed him in Lucian's arms. "Support his head just there." "Yes, like that." The baby was warm, solid, real. He smelled of milk and soap and something indefinably sweet. His eyes, blue now though they might darken, fixed on Lucian's face with intense focus. "Hello, Jamie," Lucian said awkwardly. "I am your father. I apologize for neglecting you." The baby's mouth curved in what might have been a smile or might have been gas. Delphine laughed softly, and the sound wound around Lucian's heart like silk. "He forgives you," she said. "Children are remarkably good at that." Lucian looked at her then, really looked. She sat with her legs tucked beneath her honey-colored hair slightly disheveled, her gray eyes warm, and she was so beautiful it hurt to breathe. "And you?" he asked before he could stop himself. "Are you good at forgiveness?" She tilted her head, considering. "I am still learning," she said honestly. "But I think holding on to anger is more exhausting than letting it go." Jamie chose that moment to grab a fistful of Lucian's cravat and yank with surprising strength. Lucian winced. Delphine reached over to disentangle tiny fingers from expensive linen, and her hand brushed his. They both froze. Her hand was small, warm, resting against his for only a heartbeat before she pulled away. But that brief touch sent electricity racing up Lucian's arm, and he saw from the way her breath caught that she had felt it too. "I should," she started. "Stay," he said. "Please, stay a moment longer." So she did. They sat together on the nursery floor as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, turning dust motes into gold. Lucian held his son. Delphine sat close enough that her shoulder almost touched him. And neither of them spoke, because words would have required acknowledgement of what was happening. And neither was ready for that yet. But something was changing. Something was breaking open. And Lucian, who had sworn he would never feel again, discovered that the most terrifying thing about walls is that once they begin to crack, they are almost impossible to repair. Spring arrived in earnest, transforming the grounds of Ashford House into a riot of color that seemed almost offensive in its exuberance. Delphine walked the gardens daily, sometimes with Catherine skipping ahead, sometimes pushing Jamie in the elaborate pram that had been ordered from London, sometimes alone with only her thoughts for company. On one such solitary walk, she discovered the old chapel at the far edge of the estate. It was small, medieval, half-ruined. Ivy covered the stone walls, and most of the roof had long since collapsed. But the bones remained, Gothic arches reaching toward the sky, empty windows that had once held stained glass, a sense of peace that hung in the air like incense. Delphine stood in what had once been the nave, her hands clasped before her, and allowed herself a moment of pure, unguarded grief. She missed her parents with a physical ache that had not lessened with time. She missed the life she had imagined for herself, small and simple and filled with uncomplicated love. She missed being seen, being known, being more than just a duchess who existed to provide heirs and manage households. She missed being herself. A sound behind her made her turn sharply. Lucian stood in the chapel doorway, silhouetted against the spring sunlight. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I did not mean to intrude. Mrs. Marsh said you had walked this way. I wanted to ensure you were safe." Delphine quickly wiped her eyes, hoping he had not seen the tears. "I am quite well, Your Grace. I was merely exploring." He moved closer, his boots crunching on fragments of old stone. "You are crying." It was not a question. She turned away, embarrassed to be caught in such a moment of weakness. "It is nothing. I was being foolish." "Grief is not foolish." The gentleness in his voice made her throat tighten. "How did you know it was grief?" "Because I recognize it." He came to stand beside her, looking up at the ruined arches above them. "I come here sometimes, when the walls of the house become too close, when I need to remember that things can be broken and still be beautiful." Delphine's eyes widened. She had thought herself the only one who knew of this place. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I have intruded on your sanctuary." "No." He looked at her then, and in his storm-gray eyes she saw a vulnerability she had never witnessed before. "Share it with me, if you would like." They stood side by side in the ruined chapel, not touching, barely speaking, but somehow less alone than either had been in a very long time. Finally, Delphine said, "I miss my parents. I miss them every day, and I feel ungrateful for it, because I have so much now. Catherine and Jamie, and more comfort than I ever dreamed of. But sometimes I wake in the night and forget where I am, and for a moment I think I am still in my little cottage, and my mother is downstairs making bread, and my father is reading in his study, and when I remember that they are gone, that I am here." Her voice broke. "It feels like losing them all over again," Lucian finished quietly. She nodded, tears spilling freely now. Without thinking, without allowing himself to question the impulse, Lucian reached out and took her hand, not pulling her close, not embracing her, just holding her hand in his thumb stroking gently across her knuckles. "I understand," he said. "After Isabella died, I would sometimes hear her laugh and turn, expecting to see her, only to remember. The grief returns in waves. Sometimes you think you have mastered it, and then it drags you under again without warning. How do you bear it?" Delphine whispered. "I do not know what to do," he admitted. "I think I simply continue, because the alternative is to stop, and I have Catherine. Now I have Jamie, and I have—" He stopped abruptly. "You have?" she prompted gently. "Responsibilities," he finished. But they both knew that was not what he had been about to say. They stood in silence, hands joined, until the sun began to sink toward the horizon and the chapel filled with golden light. When they finally walked back to the house, Lucian did not let go of her hand, and Delphine did not pull away. The household noticed the change, though no one dared comment directly. The Duke began taking breakfast with his family, sitting in the music room while Catherine practiced, appearing in the nursery at odd hours to watch his son sleep. He was still formal, still distant in public, but in private, small cracks continued to appear. One rainy afternoon, Delphine was in the library attempting to reach a book on a high shelf. The ladder was in another room, and she was considering the undignified option of climbing on a chair when a deep voice behind her said, "Allow me." Lucian reached past her, his chest nearly brushing her back, and pulled down the volume she had been straining for. He did not step away immediately. They stood there, impossibly close, her back nearly pressed against his chest, his arm still extended above her head, both of them frozen by the sudden awareness of proximity. Delphine could feel the heat of him, smell sandalwood and leather and something uniquely him. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Thank you," she managed, her voice breathless. "You should ask for assistance," he said, his voice rough. "What if you had fallen? I would have managed. You are always managing." His hand came down slowly, and his fingers, just the tips, brushed her shoulder. "You do not have to manage everything alone, Delphine." Her name again, the second time he had spoken it. She turned within the circle of his arm, and suddenly they were face to face, so close she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, and could count the barely visible lines at their corners. "Neither do you," she said softly. For a long moment, neither moved, neither breathed. Then Lucian stepped back sharply, as though she had burned him. I have correspondence to attend to." He left the library so quickly it was almost a flight. Delphine remained standing against the bookshelf, the forgotten volume pressed to her chest, her entire body trembling with something she dared not name. But the walls were crumbling. She could see them falling piece by piece, and she did not know whether to be terrified or elated. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Catherine fell ill quite suddenly. Nothing serious, the physician assured them, merely a spring cold. But she was miserable, feverish, crying for her mama. Delphine sat beside the child's bed for 2 days and nights, bathing her hot face with cool clothes, singing soft songs, telling stories until her voice went hoarse. On the third morning, she was half asleep in the chair beside Catherine's bed when she felt a hand on her shoulder. "Go rest," Lucian said quietly. "I will sit with her." Delphine blinked up at him, disoriented. "I cannot leave her. She needs you to be healthy." His voice was gentle but firm. "Go to your chambers. Sleep properly. I will stay with Catherine. I'll give you my word." "But you have never—" She stopped, not wanting to speak the truth aloud. "I have never taken care of her when she was ill," he finished. "I know. I am trying to change that. Please, Delphine, trust me." The use of her name decided her. She rose stiffly, her whole body aching from sleeping upright in a chair. "If she wakes and asks for me, I will send it to you immediately. Now go." She went. She slept for 6 hours straight, the deepest sleep she had experienced since Jamie's birth. When she woke, it was afternoon, and sunlight streamed through her windows. She dressed quickly and hurried to Catherine's room, her heart in her throat. The scene that greeted her stopped her in the doorway. Lucian sat in the chair she had vacated, Catherine tucked against his chest, her head on his shoulder. He was reading to her. Something about a brave princess and a dragon. His deep voice soft as she had never heard it. Catherine's fever had broken. Her eyes were closed, but she was smiling slightly, clearly awake but content to listen. And so, Lucian read. The princess realized she did not need a prince to save her. She could save herself. But it was rather nice to have someone who believed she could. Catherine giggled weakly. "I like that story, Papa. I am glad, Poppet. Will you read it again tomorrow?" "If you wish. Every day." Lucian pressed a kiss to his daughter's forehead. "Every day," he promised. Delphine's eyes filled with tears. Lucian looked up and saw her standing there. Something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of what they were building together without ever putting words to it. That night, after Catherine was settled and Jamie fed and slept, after the house had gone quiet and the servants retired, Delphine sat in her chambers brushing her hair. A knock came at her door. She opened it to find Lucian standing in the corridor, still fully dressed, his face troubled. "May I speak with you?" he asked. "Of course. Come in." She realized her mistake immediately. Inviting him into her private chambers was wildly inappropriate, even though they were married. But he was already stepping inside, and closing the door would seem more intimate than leaving it open. She left it slightly ajar. Lucian did not sit. He stood by the window, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him. "I owe you an apology," he said. "For what?" "For everything." He turned to face her. "For the coldness. For the distance. For marrying you and then treating you as though you were merely a servant. For bringing you into this house and giving you nothing but duty and loneliness." Delphine's breath caught. "You gave me Catherine," she said softly. "And Jamie. You gave me a home when I had none. You gave me more than you know. But I did not give you what you deserved." He took a step toward her. "I did not give you kindness, companionship. I did not give you—" He stopped, the words trapped in his throat. "What?" she whispered. "What did you not give me?" "Myself." The word hung between them, raw and honest. "I have been a coward, Delphine. I have hidden behind the memory of my first wife, behind the pain she caused me, and I have used that as an excuse to remain distant, to remain safe." He took another step closer. "But today, sitting with Catherine, reading to her, feeling her trust me again, I realize that safety is worthless if it means living only half a life." Delphine could not breathe, could not move. "What are you saying, Lucian?" "I am saying—" He stopped directly before her, close enough to touch, close enough that she could see his hands trembling slightly. "I am saying that I have been lying to myself, lying to you. I told myself that I felt nothing for you beyond respect, that our marriage was merely a duty, that I could keep my heart locked away forever. And now," the question barely made it past her lips, "now I know the truth." His hand came up slowly, giving her time to step back, to refuse. She did not move. His fingers brushed her cheek, the touch so gentle it was almost reverent. "The truth is that you have unmade me, Delphine." Slowly, quietly, without even trying. "You have shown me what it means to be good, to be patient, to love without expecting anything in return. You saved my daughter. You love my son. You have given everything and asked for nothing." Tears streamed down her face. "And somewhere in the middle of all that," he continued, his voice breaking, "I fell in love with you, desperately, completely, terrifyingly in love with you." The world stopped turning. "You love me?" she whispered, certain she had misheard. "I love you," he confirmed, and his thumb wiped away her tears. "I love the way you sing French lullabies. I love the way you sit on the floor to play with Jamie. I love the way you look at Catherine as though she is the most precious thing in the world. I love your strength and your gentleness and your terrible habit of trying to reach books from high shelves without asking for help." She laughed through her tears. "I love you," he said again. "And I know I have no right to ask anything of you after how I have treated you. I know I have wounded you, pushed you away, made you believe you were nothing more than an obligation. But I am asking now, begging now, for a chance to be the husband you deserved from the beginning." Delphine stared up at him, this beautiful, broken man who had spent so long hiding from feeling, and her heart simply overflowed. "You foolish man," she said, and she reached up to cup his face in both hands. "You perfect, foolish man. Did you truly not know?" "Know what?" "That I have loved you almost from the beginning. That I married you knowing you could not love me back and chose to stay anyway. That every cold word, every distant look, every moment you pushed me away broke my heart a little more. And I bore it because I loved you enough for both of us." His eyes closed. A single tear escaped, sliding down his cheek to dampen her hand. "Delphine, I love you, Lucian Ashford. I love your honor and your pain and the way you are trying so hard to be better. I love watching you with Catherine. I love that you came to me in a ruined chapel and held my hand. I love every small crack in your armor, every moment you forget to be cold, every time you say my name as though it is something precious." "I do not deserve you," he said hoarsely. "Perhaps not, but you have me anyway." And then, finally, after months of distance and coldness and walls carefully maintained, Lucian Ashford bent his head and kissed his wife. It was not the cold, brief kiss of their wedding. It was not the mechanical touch of their wedding night. It was real, desperate, full of everything they had not said, had not allowed themselves to feel. His arms came around her, pulling her against him as though she might disappear if he did not hold tight enough. Her hands slid into his hair, and she kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of months spent loving a man who would not love her in return. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucian rested his forehead against hers. "I will spend the rest of my life," he said quietly, "making up for the months I wasted." "Then we are both fortunate," she replied, "that we have the rest of our lives." He kissed her again, softer this time, sweeter, and outside, spring rain began to fall, washing away the last remnants of winter, making room for something new to grow. For 3 weeks after that night, Ashford House was transformed. Lucian made good on his promise. He had breakfast with his family every morning, joined Delphine for walks in the gardens, sat beside her in the evenings, reading while she embroidered, their shoulders touching, their silence companionable rather than cold. He was attentive, affectionate in the small, careful ways of a man learning how to be tender again. A hand at the small of her back. Her name was spoken softly as prayer. Kisses stolen in empty corridors that left them both breathless. The servants whispered that the Duke smiled now. Actually smiled. Catherine bloomed under the attention of both her parents. At dinner one night, she announced with delight that she had a real family now. The kind in books where everyone loves each other. Delphine met Lucian's eyes across the table, and the look that passed between them made her blush. That night, he came to her chambers properly. Not for duty, but for love. And when he undressed her slowly, worshipfully, pressing kisses to her skin and murmuring how beautiful she was, how precious, Delphine finally understood what it meant to be truly seen. Afterward, they lay tangled together in her bed, her head on his chest, his fingers drawing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "I wish," she said softly, "that I could go back and tell the girl who stood in your study accepting your cold proposal that everything would turn out like this, that the Ice Duke would thaw, that she would be loved." Lucian's arms tightened around her. "I wish I could go back and tell myself not to waste so much time being a fool." She tilted her head to look up at him. "We have time now. That is what matters." He kissed her forehead. "Yes, we have time. But time, as they would learn, is a gift that can be stolen without warning." It began with a letter. Lucian's cousin Edmund, the man who would inherit the dukedom if anything happened to Jamie, announced his intention to visit Ashford House. "It is merely courtesy," the letter claimed. "I wish to pay my respects to the new Duchess and meet the heir. Surely you cannot object to family becoming acquainted." Lucian objected strenuously. Edmund was a wastrel, a gambler, a man whose debts were legendary among the town. He had made no secret of his disappointment when Delphine had produced a healthy son, and had even been heard to mutter in his cups that it was inconvenient for some people to be so damn fertile. "Do not let him come," Lucian said to Delphine as they stood in his study, the letter crumpled in his fist. "Something about this feels wrong." "He is family," Delphine replied reasonably, "and he has every right to meet Jamie. We cannot refuse him without giving offense." "I do not care about giving offense. But I do." She placed her hand over his. "Lucian, we cannot live in fear. Edmund is crude and thoughtless, but he is not dangerous. Let him come for a brief visit. We will endure his company for a few days, and then he will leave." Lucian studied her face, saw the certainty there, and reluctantly conceded. 3 days, he said. "No more." 3 days, she agreed. Edmund arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a hired carriage, his cravat askew, his eyes too bright, reeking of brandy even at 3 in the afternoon. "Cousin," he boomed, clapping Lucian on the shoulder with false heartiness. "And this must be the lovely Duchess. My dear, you are even prettier than the gossip claimed." Quite the catch for old Lucian here, rising from governess to Duchess. "Very enterprising of you." The insult was delivered with a smile, as though it were a compliment. Delphine's spine straightened, but she kept her expression serene. "Mr. Ashford, welcome to our home." "Our home," Edmund repeated, looking around the entrance hall with barely concealed avarice. Yes, well, it is a fine house. Though I suppose it might have been mine if you had not been quite so efficient about producing an heir. That is enough, Lucian said coldly. Edmund laughed, throwing up his hands. Peace, cousin. I meant no offense. Merely making conversation. Now, where is this miraculous child? This nephew of mine who stands between me and a fortune. Jamie was brought down from the nursery by his nurse, and Edmund made all the appropriate noises. What a fine, strong boy. Clearly has the Ashford features. Quite the little duke already. But his eyes, when they rested on the infant, held something that made Delphine's skin prickle with unease. That night at dinner, Edmund drank too much and spoke too freely. He regaled them with stories of his latest losses at the gaming tables, laughed about creditors who were becoming tediously insistent about payment, and made barely veiled comments about how inconvenient it was that primogeniture favored babies over grown men who could actually appreciate a fortune. But of course, he said, raising his glass in a mocking toast, we are all delighted about the healthy heir. Long may he live and all that. Lucian's jaw was so tight Delphine feared his teeth would crack. After dinner, Edmund excused himself, claiming the journey had exhausted him. As soon as he was gone, Lucian turned to Delphine. We are sending him away tomorrow. I do not care if it is rude. Agreed, Delphine said immediately, all her earlier insistence on courtesy forgotten. There is something wrong about him, something that frightens me. They went upstairs together, checked on Catherine, then stopped at the nursery where Jamie slept peacefully in his cradle. Perhaps, Delphine said softly, I should sleep in the nursery tonight, just to be certain. Lucian looked at her, saw the genuine worry in her eyes, and nodded. I will have a cot brought in. Stay with me, she said impulsively. Please, I do not want to be alone. So they brought in 2 cots and positioned them on either side of Jamie's cradle. An absurd arrangement for a duke and duchess, but neither cared about dignity when their son's safety suddenly felt uncertain. They lay in the darkness, listening to the baby breathe, and Delphine reached across the space between the cots to take Lucian's hand. I love you, she whispered. I love you, he replied. They fell asleep still holding hands, still connected, still believing they were safe. Delphine woke to the smell of smoke. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then she heard the crackling, saw the orange glow flickering beneath the nursery door, and terror crashed over her like ice water. Lucian! She was out of her cot in an instant, shaking him awake. Lucian! Fire! The house is on fire! He woke immediately, all the former soldier's instincts snapping into place. Get Jamie! Now! Delphine scooped the baby from his cradle, wrapping him in blankets, holding him tight against her chest. Lucian went to the door, pressed his hand against it, jerked back. It's hot. The fire is close. He spun, assessing the room with quick efficiency. The window. We're 3 floors up, but there's the old oak tree close to the building. Can you climb? With Jamie? You have to. Smoke was beginning to seep under the door now, acrid and choking. Lucian wrenched open the window. The oak tree was perhaps 6 feet away, its branches thick and old and blessedly close to the nursery window. I will go first, he said. Once I am stable, hand me Jamie, then come across. Do not look down. Do you understand? What about Catherine? Her room is in the other wing. The fire has not spread there yet. Once you are safe, I will go back for her. Lucian. No arguments. Now. He climbed onto the window ledge, reached out, grasped the nearest branch. For one heart-stopping moment he hung in space. Then he swung himself into the tree with the agility of a much younger man. Hand him to me. Delphine leaned out as far as she dared. The distance seemed impossible. The drop below was darkness and death. But Jamie was crying now, frightened by the smoke and chaos, and she had no choice. I love you, she whispered to the baby, and she stretched out over nothing, holding her son toward his father. Lucian's hands closed around Jamie just as a crash sounded behind Delphine. The nursery door had burst inward, and flames roared into the room like living things, hungry and hot. Delphine now. She climbed onto the window ledge, the heat at her back, smoke filling her lungs. The branch seemed so far away. She reached. Her hand caught bark, slipped, caught again. She launched herself into space. For one terrible second she was falling. Then Lucian's arm, strong as iron, locked around her waist, catching her, holding her, pulling her against him. They clung to each other and their son in the branches of an oak tree, while below them, servants poured from the house, screaming, running for water, chaos erupting in the darkness. "Catherine," Delphine gasped. "Lucian, you must stay here. Do not move." He pressed Jamie into her arms, kissed them both fiercely, and began climbing down the tree with reckless speed. Delphine watched him drop the last 10 feet, landing in a crouch, then sprint toward the house where flames now licked from several windows. "Your Grace, no!" A footman tried to stop him. Lucian shoved past without slowing. He ran into the burning house while Delphine stood clutching their son, screaming his name. Time stretched like taffy. Every second was an hour. Every moment he did not emerge was death. Then, finally, Lucian burst from the front door, Catherine in his arms, both of them coughing, his coat smoldering. He made it perhaps 20 feet before he collapsed. Delphine was running before she realized she had climbed down from the tree. Jamie still clutched to her chest, her feet bare and bleeding on the gravel drive, her nightgown torn and filthy. "Lucian!" She fell to her knees beside him. He was breathing, gasping, really, his face black with soot, his hair singed. But he was alive. Catherine clung to him, sobbing. "Papa saved me," she cried. "Papa came through the fire and saved me." "Of course I did, Poppet," Lucian rasped, pulling himself upright with visible effort. "Did you think I would leave you?" He looked at Delphine then, and in his eyes she saw the terrible truth. Someone had set that fire deliberately. Someone had tried to kill them all. The fire was contained within the hour, though half of Ashford House was a smoking ruin. Edmund was nowhere to be found. His room was empty, his belongings gone, and stable boys reported that a horse had been taken sometime around midnight. The fire had started in the hallway outside the nursery, accelerated by lamp oil that someone had deliberately poured on the floor. The intent was unmistakable. "He tried to kill Jamie," Lucian said, his voice hollow with shock and fury. "My own cousin tried to murder my infant son to secure the succession for himself." They stood in the gardens as dawn broke, wrapped in blankets someone had brought, watching smoke still curl from the ruined house. Catherine slept finally, exhausted, in Mrs. Marsh's arms nearby. Jamie was miraculously calm, tucked against Delphine's chest, apparently unaware that he had almost died. "He failed," Delphine said fiercely. "We are alive. All of us." Lucian turned to look at her. His face was haggard, his eyes red-rimmed from smoke, and he had never looked more beautiful to her. "I could have lost you," he said, his voice cracking. "Both of you. When I saw you climbing onto that window ledge, when I saw the flames." She shifted Jamie to one arm and reached for Lucian with the other, pulling him close. "But you did not lose us. We are here. We are safe. Only because—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "Only because you woke up on time. If you had slept 5 minutes longer—" "Do not think about that. We are alive. That is what matters." He buried his face in her hair, his arms coming around both her and Jamie, holding them so tight she could barely breathe. "I love you," he said brokenly. "God, Delphine, I love you so much it terrifies me. The thought of existing in a world where you do not." "Hush." She pulled back enough to cup his face, to make him look at her. "I am here. I am not going anywhere. Do you hear me, Lucian Ashford? You are stuck with me, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in fire and in health." He laughed despite himself, a short, desperate sound. "I believe the vow is in sickness and in health. Well, we survived the fire. I think that counts." He kissed her then, soot-stained and desperate, while the sun rose over the ruins of their home and their infant son made small, contented sounds between them. And Delphine knew with absolute certainty that they had survived not just fire, but the last test of Lucian's fear. He had walked into flames for their family. There were no walls left to break down. London was scandalized. The news of the fire at Ashford House spread through the town like its own conflagration, growing more elaborate with each retelling. The Duke's cousin had tried to murder the heir. The Duke had run into a burning building to save his daughter. The Duke and Duchess had climbed trees in their nightclothes. The Duchess had protected the baby with her own body. Some of it was true. Some of it was embellishment. All of it was delicious gossip. By the time the Ashford family arrived in London 3 weeks later, having left Ashford House to be rebuilt, having pursued Edmund across half of England before he was finally apprehended and arrested, society was ravenous for details. Lady Westmere, one of the most influential hostesses in London, immediately extended an invitation to her midsummer ball. "You must come," the letter urged. "All of society is desperate to see you, to congratulate you on your miraculous survival, to celebrate the heir being safe." Delphine read the letter aloud to Lucian as they sat in the drawing room of their London townhouse. "She wants to gawk at us," Lucian said flatly, "to turn our trauma into entertainment. Perhaps," Delphine conceded, "but also to show support, to demonstrate that your cousin's actions have not diminished the respect society holds for you. For us." He looked at her thoughtfully. "You want to go?" "I think we should go," she corrected. "I think we should walk into that ballroom with our heads high and show everyone that we are not broken, that we are, in fact, stronger than ever." He considered this, then nodded slowly. "Very well, but only if you want it. I will not subject you to scrutiny if you are not ready." "I am ready," she said firmly. "I am the Duchess of Greystone. It is time I stopped hiding from that." The night of the ball, Delphine dressed with unusual care. She chose a gown of deep sapphire blue that brought out the gray of her eyes, had her hair dressed in an elaborate style with pearls woven through it, and wore the Greystone diamonds that had belonged to generations of duchesses. When she descended the stairs to where Lucian waited, his face transformed. "You are breathtaking," he said, his voice low with admiration and something warmer. "I am trying," she replied, "to look like a woman who belongs beside you." He crossed to her, took her hand, raised it to his lips. "You have always belonged beside me, Delphine. I was simply too blind to see it." The ballroom of Westmere House blazed with 1,000 candles, and when the majordomo announced, "His Grace the Duke of Greystone and Her Grace the Duchess of Greystone," the entire room fell silent. Every eye turned toward them. Delphine felt her courage waver for just a moment. Then Lucian's hand tightened on hers, and he murmured, "Courage, my love. They cannot hurt you while I stand beside you." They descended the stairs together. The whispers began immediately, hissing through the crowd like wind through leaves. "There they are. The fire. Did you hear? The cousin tried to. She used to be a governess, you know. He married so far beneath him, but they say he is utterly besotted with her." Lady Westmere glided forward to greet them, her face alight with sympathetic concern. "Your Graces. Oh, how delighted we are to see you safe. What a terrible ordeal. You must tell us everything." No, only if you are comfortable, of course. "Come, let me introduce you to everyone who has been simply desperate to pay their respects." For the next hour, they were passed from group to group like curiosities at a museum. Everyone wanted to hear the story. Everyone had questions. Everyone looked at Delphine with barely concealed fascination. This former governess who had risen so impossibly high, who had apparently captured the heart of one of England's coldest dukes. Some were kind. Most were merely curious. A few were cruel in the subtle ways society ladies had perfected. "You must feel so fortunate, Your Grace," one woman said with poisonous sweetness, "to have made such an extraordinary match, from governess to duchess. Quite the fairy tale." "Yes," Delphine replied with equal sweetness. "I am fortunate, though I believe my husband would say he is the fortunate one." "Would he indeed?" The woman's eyebrows rose skeptically. Before Delphine could respond, a hand settled possessively on her waist. "He would," Lucian said. his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet circle that had formed around them. And he would be correct. He looked at Delphine with such open adoration that several women actually gasped. My wife, he continued, addressing not just their immediate circle but the entire ballroom, as the crowd had gone silent to listen, is the bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. She saved my daughter from silence and grief. She gave me a son who will one day inherit everything I possess. And 3 weeks ago, she climbed down a burning building while protecting that son with her own body. His hand moved from her waist to take her hand, raising it to his lips. She married me when I was cold and broken and determined never to feel again. And through patience and grace and a love I did nothing to earn, she taught me how to be human again, how to be a father, how to be a husband worthy of the title. The entire ballroom was riveted now. I do not care, Lucian said clearly, where she came from. I do not care that she was a governess, or that her father was a poor scholar, or that she had no dowry and no connections when we married. I care only that she is mine, and I am hers, and anyone who suggests she is anything less than the finest Duchess England has seen in a generation will answer to me personally. Dead silence. Then Lady Westmere began to clap. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in applause. Delphine stared up at her husband, tears streaming down her face, utterly undone by this public declaration. You did not have to do that, she whispered. Yes, he said fiercely. I did. No more hiding, Delphine. No more pretending what we have is anything less than everything. He kissed her then, properly, in front of all of London society, and let them whisper about that. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the applause had transformed into delighted chatter. The ball continued, but everything had changed. Ladies who had snubbed Delphine earlier now sought her out to offer compliments on her gown, her jewels, her obvious happiness. Gentlemen who had viewed Lucian as cold and unapproachable now clapped him on the shoulder and congratulated him on his extraordinary good sense in marrying for love. Even the cruelest gossips had to concede that the Duke and Duchess of Greystone were a love match, and a rare and beautiful one at that. Near midnight, Lucian drew Delphine onto the dance floor. They waltzed in perfect synchrony, and he looked at her with such unguarded love that several watching mamas dabbed at their eyes. You have made me the happiest of men, he said softly, for her ears only. No, she replied, her eyes shining. You have made yourself happy by finally allowing yourself to feel. I merely showed you it was safe. You are everything to me, he said. You know that, don't you? You and Catherine and Jamie. You are my entire world. I know, she said simply, because you are mine. He kissed her hand, and they continued dancing as though the ballroom contained only the two of them. Outside, summer rain began to fall, gentle and warm, washing London clean. And inside, a former governess and a formerly cold duke held each other close and proved that love, when it finally comes, is worth every moment of darkness that preceded it. 1 year later, the new Ashford house rose from the ruins of the old, larger and somehow warmer, with windows that let in more light and corridors that did not echo quite so hollowly. The nursery occupied the entire east wing now, with rooms for Catherine, Jamie, and the new baby girl who had arrived 3 months ago, pink and screaming and perfect. They had named her Isabel Rose. Isabel for Lucian's first wife, because as Delphine had said gently, she gave you Catherine. She deserves to be remembered. Rose for Delphine's mother. It was a name that honored the past without being haunted by it. On a warm September afternoon, the entire family gathered in the restored gardens. Catherine, now 8 years old and startlingly articulate, was teaching Jamie to identify flowers. The boy, nearly 18 months old and walking with the drunken confidence of all toddlers, pointed at everything and shouted "Flower!" with great enthusiasm. Delphine sat on a blanket beneath the old oak tree, the same oak that had saved their lives a year ago, nursing Isabel Rose and watching her family with contentment so deep it was almost painful. Lucian emerged from the house carrying a basket. Mrs. Henley sent sandwiches, he announced, settling beside Delphine on the blanket. And those little cakes Catherine loves. You spoil them, Delphine said without heat. I spoil all of you, he corrected, leaning over to press a kiss to her temple, then another to Isabel Rose's downy head. It is my greatest pleasure. Catherine ran over, Jamie toddling after her. Papa, Jamie pulled the head off a rose. I told him not to, but he did it anyway. I am certain he did not mean to pop it. Flower, Jamie announced proudly, presenting his father with a sadly mangled bloom. Lucian took it with great solemnity. Thank you, my boy. It is a very fine flower. Jamie beamed, then noticed the basket and immediately began trying to climb into it. No, let us lay out the blanket properly first. Catherine, help me. The children settled, and for a few moments there was blessed peace as they all ate sandwiches and cakes and enjoyed the afternoon sun. Delphine looked at her husband, at the way he held Jamie on his lap while simultaneously managing to eat and prevent the boy from dumping an entire cup of lemonade on his head, and her heart swelled. You are good at this, she said softly. He looked up, caught her gaze. At what? At being happy, at being a father, at being... She paused, searching for the right word. At being yourself. His expression softened into something so tender it made her breath catch. I had an excellent teacher. After the children had eaten their fill and ran off to play again, Catherine pulling Jamie in a little wagon while he shrieked with delight, Lucian shifted closer to Delphine. Isabel Rose had finished nursing and was sleeping contentedly in her mother's arms, her rosebud mouth still making small sucking motions. She looks like you, Lucian observed, stroking one tiny fist with his finger. She has your nose. Poor child. Delphine laughed. It is a very distinguished nose, Your Grace. It is a very large nose, he corrected, but he was smiling. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play, listening to the sounds of the garden. Bees humming, birds singing, the distant murmur of servants going about their work. Do you ever think about that night? Delphine asked quietly. The fire. Every day, Lucian admitted, though not with fear anymore, with gratitude. Gratitude, he nodded. It took a fire to burn away the last of my pride, to make me understand that loving you, loving our children, is not a weakness. It is the only thing that gives life meaning. He turned to face her fully. Edmund's trial is next month. He will hang for attempted murder, and I should feel triumph or vindication or something. But all I feel is pity. He was so consumed by greed that he was willing to murder an infant for money he had not earned and a title he did not deserve. What a wretched way to live. You are a better man than he ever was, Delphine said firmly. Only because you made me so. No, Lucian. She reached for his hand. You chose to change. I merely showed you it was possible. He raised her hand to his lips, kissed each knuckle slowly. I love you, he said. I tell you that every day, but I do not think you truly understand how much. You saved me, Delphine, not just from loneliness or grief, but from myself, from the cold, bitter man I was becoming. And you saved me, she replied. From poverty, yes, and from being alone, but also from believing that I was not worthy of being loved. Catherine's voice drifted across the garden. Mama, Papa, come see what Jamie found. They rose together, Lucian taking the sleeping Isabel Rose from Delphine's arms while she stood and shook out her skirts. Hand in hand, they walked across the garden to where their children waited. Later that evening, after the children had been fed and bathed and put to bed, after Catherine had insisted on 3 stories and Jamie had escaped twice before finally succumbing to sleep, after Isabel Rose had been nursed and burped and laid in her cradle, Lucian and Delphine finally found themselves alone. They sat in the library, rebuilt with even more books than before a crackling fire. Delphine leaned against Lucian's shoulder, his arm wrapped around her. Both of them simply existing in that perfect, rare moment when the house was quiet and they had nothing demanded of them. Do you ever regret it? Lucian asked suddenly. Delphine tilted her head to look up at him. Regret what? Accepting my proposal. Marrying a cold, broken man who could not even give you a proper courtship. Who made you promises of distance and duty and nothing more. She considered this seriously. Every day, she said finally. His face fell. That I did not say yes faster, she finished and smiled at his expression. Oh, Lucian, how could I regret the path that led me to you? To Catherine? To Jamie and Isabel Rose? To this life we have built together. I was cruel to you. You were afraid. There is a difference. I wasted months. You needed those months to heal, and I needed them to understand what I truly wanted, what I was willing to fight for. She shifted to face him fully. I have no regrets, Lucian Ashford. Not one. Even the hard parts, even the coldness and the distance, they taught us both what we were capable of enduring, what we were capable of becoming. He cupped her face in both hands. You are extraordinary. I am ordinary, she corrected. I am a former governess who got very, very lucky. No, his voice was fierce. You are a duchess, my duchess, the mother of my children, the love of my life, and there is nothing ordinary about that. He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. When they finally drew apart, Delphine was breathless. Shall we retire, Your Grace? She asked with a smile that was equal parts innocent and wicked. I thought you would never ask. They walked upstairs hand in hand, stopping to check on each child. Catherine sprawled in her bed with a book open on her chest. Jamie starfished across his mattress with his bottom in the air. Isabel Rose sleeping peacefully in her cradle with one tiny fist pressed to her cheek. We made them, Lucian whispered in wonder, as he did nearly every night. Look at them, Delphine. Look at what we made together. They are beautiful, she agreed. They are perfect. In their own chambers, connected now by a door that was never locked, they made love with the practiced ease of partners who knew each other's bodies, each other's hearts, each other's souls. And afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Lucian said softly, Thank you. For what? For singing to my son in the middle of the night. For loving my daughter. For seeing through my walls. For staying even when I gave you every reason to leave. For being you. Delphine pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. Thank you for climbing down a burning building with me. For declaring your love in front of all of society. For becoming the man I always knew you could be. For loving me back. Always, he promised. For the rest of my life and whatever comes after. Forever, she agreed. They fell asleep tangled together, safe and warm and deeply, completely loved. And in the nursery down the hall, Jamie stirred in his sleep and made a soft, contented sound. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed midnight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments of ordinary and extraordinary love. But tonight, in the restored Ashford house, a family slept peacefully. A duke who had been cold and had learned warmth. A governess who had become a duchess and found her worth. And the children they were raising together in a home built not on duty or obligation, but on love hard-won and fiercely protected. They had survived fire, both literal and metaphorical. They had survived loss and grief and walls built too high. They had survived the lies they told themselves about what they deserved. And on the other side of all that survival, they had found something precious and rare and worth every moment of darkness that had come before. They had found home, not a place but a people, not safety but love. And that, as every great story knows, is the only ending that truly matters.